In this video, we're going to take a look at the decimal property called balance, which we will use to manipulate the instance variable of type balance that was declared up above. Now, the reason that we have a full property declaration here rather than an auto-implemented property is this extra logic that you see down here in the set accessor. Anytime you have additional logic for a get or set accessor of a property, you have to provide a complete property declaration. And when you provide a complete property declaration, the compiler does not auto-generate a corresponding private piece of data. So if you need one, you must define it. And you might say, well, of course I need one. Well, actually, sometimes you'll have properties that simply calculate values based on other properties. So for example, if I had a rectangle class that contained a width property and a height property, I could also give it an area property that simply multiplies the width times the height. It doesn't need an extra piece of data to store the actual area calculation result. It can simply return that result. So here we have the public decimal property called balance. It is only capable of manipulating a piece of data of type decimal. And of course, balance was declared as a decimal so-called field of the class. That's the generic term that Microsoft uses for all data declared in a class. And the get accessor will simply return that value of balance, whereas the set accessor will make sure that the value we assign to the property is greater than 0 before it takes that value and assigns it to the instance variable balance. Now, if we did not initialize the balance explicitly, it's still going to get its default value, which is 0. And that's why we're comparing greater than 0 here at line 27. Balance already is 0 before line 27 executes. So there's no need, if value is 0, to assign it to the balance again. We only assign to the balance if the value is greater than 0. And notice the M character here, which indicates that 0.0 in this case is a decimal literal, as opposed to the other floating point types that C# supports, which are float and double. When you have a literal in C# that has no character following it to indicate its type, C# treats that as a double value by default. And the reason we're now getting a red squiggly line here is that you're not allowed to compare decimals and other floating point types, nor are you allowed to perform arithmetic between decimals and other floating point types. So decimals can only be compared with other decimals or used in calculations with other decimals as well. And the letter M, which can be either a lowercase m or a capital M, represents the fact that 0.0 in this case is a decimal literal value as opposed to a double literal value. So if the value is greater than 0, and only if it's greater than 0, will we take the value that was assigned to the property and store it into the balance instance variable. Now, we also declared this set accessor as private. The property is public, meaning that it is exposed to the client code. However, you can have one of the two accessors have a more restrictive access modifier. So even though the property is a public property, only the get accessor is considered to be public. The set accessor is explicitly declared private, meaning that it can be used only within the curly braces of class accounts body. So we can use it from line 5 down to the end of the class definition at line 42. Anything outside of that scope is not able to see the private accessor, the private set accessor for the balance property. In the next video, we'll take a look at the deposit method.